Hello, everyone. Welcome to Learn English podcast.
How to think in English in every situation. Learn English through podcast.
Learning to think in English in every situation is not something that happens overnight. It is a skill that develops gradually, and the sooner you start practicing, the faster your brain will begin to switch from your native language to English automatically. And for young learners who are serious about improving their English, understanding how to train your mind is crucial because most people make the mistake of translating from their first language into English when speaking or writing, and this slows down communication, creates confusion, and even makes learning feel more difficult than it really is. But the key is to train your brain to respond in English without going through translation. And the easiest and most effective way to do this is by surrounding yourself with English in your daily life, using podcasts, videos, and conversations to immerse yourself in the language. And when you listen to podcasts designed for learners, you are not just hearing English words, you are training your brain to recognize patterns, intonation, pronunciation, and grammar naturally. And the first step is to listen actively, meaning you don't just let the sound pass by, but you focus on understanding each word, phrase, and sentence. And even if you don't understand everything at first, it is okay because the brain will gradually start to predict meaning based on context, repetition, and familiarity. And the more you listen, the more your brain stores English vocabulary as mental shortcuts, so that when you need to speak or think, the right word comes automatically. And this is how thinking in English begins, because your mind stops pausing to translate and instead reacts directly in English. And one important habit is to narrate your life in English silently, meaning as you brush your teeth, walk to school, do homework, or play, try to describe your actions, thoughts, and surroundings in English in your head. And at first, it may feel slow or awkward, but every time you do it, you strengthen your mental connection to English, and it becomes a habit. And podcasts are perfect for this because they give you examples of how native speakers describe situations naturally, and by repeating phrases, sentences, and expressions out loud or silently in your head, you start to internalize common patterns so that eventually your mind can produce English thoughts without effort. And if you combine listening with shadowing, which means repeating what you hear immediately, your pronunciation, rhythm, and confidence improve simultaneously. And as a young learner, you should also use visualization techniques, imagining scenarios in English, such as shopping at a store, asking for directions, or talking to friends, and narrating what happens in English in your mind, because the brain responds to imagined situations almost the same way it responds to real situations. And the more you practice this, the faster your brain adapts to thinking in English automatically. And it is also important to integrate English into your daily routines, like labeling objects in your room with their English names, thinking about the weather, food, or activities in English, and even asking yourself questions in English, such as, "What should I do next?" or "How do I feel right now?" And answering in English silently, because this constant practice creates a mental environment where English becomes your natural language for thought. And while listening to podcasts, you can pause, repeat, and replay, imagining yourself responding as if in a conversation. And this bridges passive understanding with active thinking. And the more consistently you expose yourself to English, the stronger your mental fluency becomes. And another key method is to set small challenges, such as thinking in English for 5 minutes, then 10, then 30 minutes during the day, gradually extending until it becomes automatic. And during these exercises, it is important not to worry about mistakes, grammar, or perfect sentences, because the goal is mental fluency first and accuracy will follow. And young learners should also engage with interactive podcasts, ones that ask you to answer questions, repeat phrases, or perform simple exercises because active engagement forces the brain to respond in English, which strengthens thinking habits. And combining this with writing in English about your day, thoughts, and ideas reinforces the neural pathways, so that speaking, writing, and thinking are all connected. And using a smartphone or computer to record your voice while thinking in English, then listening to yourself, helps identify areas to improve. And the repetition builds confidence, making it easier to think in English in real-life situations. And it is essential to create an English-only bubble at certain times. For example, during a walk, commute, or study session, deciding consciously to only think, describe, and process thoughts in English. And when you encounter new words or expressions in podcasts, immediately try to integrate them into your mental sentences, repeating them silently, imagining contexts where you would use them. And gradually, these words stop being foreign. They become part of your automatic English thinking. And visualization combined with repetition and shadowing accelerates the process, because the brain starts to store expressions as ready-to-use mental chunks, reducing the need to construct sentences word by word, which is exactly what slows down thinking and speaking. And over time, you will notice that when a situation arises, your first thought is already in English. You no longer pause to translate, and your mind begins to operate as if English is your second internal language. And podcasts help in this process, not only through content, but also through tone, rhythm, and natural phrasing, teaching your brain how native speakers group words, which is crucial for thinking naturally. And listening repeatedly to conversational podcasts builds anticipation, helping your mind predict what comes next, which is a critical skill for fluent thought. And young learners should also combine all of these techniques with real-life application, such as thinking out loud in English while talking to family or friends, or even practicing self-talk silently in the mind, describing your feelings, decisions, or reactions. Because repeated practice turns English thinking into an unconscious habit. And the key is consistency, patience, and persistence, because just like learning to ride a bike, once your brain adapts, it becomes effortless. And the more you immerse yourself, the faster the adaptation. And technology allows unlimited repetition, interaction, and feedback, which is impossible in traditional learning. And by listening to podcasts daily, shadowing, narrating, visualizing, practicing active thought, recording and replaying your voice, labeling objects, thinking questions and answers, and maintaining English-only bubbles, young learners gradually transform their thinking process. And after weeks and months of consistent practice, even difficult situations like describing complex feelings, planning tasks, or solving problems will trigger immediate English thoughts. And this is the ultimate goal, because thinking in English not only improves speaking, but also boosts comprehension, reading, writing, confidence, and even cultural understanding. And by the time you internalize these habits, English is no longer a subject you study. It becomes a natural part of your life. Your brain has been rewired to respond automatically, and every podcast episode, every repetition, every imagined scenario adds another brick to the foundation. And as you continue, challenges such as unfamiliar words, fast speakers, or new grammar structures become easier because your brain is trained to process English intuitively. And this mental fluency empowers young learners to communicate confidently, respond quickly, and enjoy the language fully without fear, hesitation, or constant translation. And the most exciting part is that once this skill develops, it continues to grow exponentially, because every time you listen, think, or speak in English, you reinforce the neural pathways, creating stronger, faster, and more reliable mental connections. And technology, especially podcasts designed for learning, becomes the engine that fuels this transformation, because it provides endless examples, exposure, and repetition. And as you integrate these techniques with daily life, consistent mental exercises, active engagement, and creative imagination, you will reach a point where thinking in English in every situation is no longer a challenge. It is your default mode. And when that happens, everything else becomes easier. Understanding movies, reading books, having conversations. Writing essays or even dreaming in English becomes possible. And for young learners, this is the ultimate freedom because English becomes not just a subject, but a mental tool to navigate the world, express ideas, connect with others, and grow intellectually, emotionally, and socially. And the process begins with one conscious choice: to use podcasts and daily mental exercises to train your brain and to continue practicing relentlessly every day in every moment until thinking in English becomes automatic, effortless, and natural. And by following these steps, young learners can achieve a level of English fluency that is far beyond what traditional methods offer, because the brain is immersed, active, and constantly processing English. And this is the true secret to mastering the language. And once mastered, it opens doors to learning, travel, communication, opportunity, and confidence. Because when your thoughts are already in English, speaking, listening, writing, and understanding happen naturally. And this is why podcasts, combined with imagination, self-talk, repetition, shadowing, visualization, and daily integration, is one of the most powerful methods for young learners to learn to think in English in every situation, creating lifelong skills, mental fluency, and freedom to use English as a natural language in any context. As you continue developing the habit of thinking in English, it is important to understand that your brain works like a muscle, and the more you train it to process English in real time, the stronger and faster it becomes. And this is why repetition is key. Because every time you listen to a podcast, repeat phrases, shadow sentences, or silently narrate your actions in English, you are creating and reinforcing neural pathways that make English your default mode of thought. And young learners must realize that it is normal to feel slow or awkward in the beginning, because your brain is learning a completely new way of processing information. But with patience, persistence, and daily practice, these moments of struggle gradually transform into automatic fluency. And podcasts are uniquely powerful in this process because they expose you to authentic language, including natural expressions, idioms, slang, and cultural context. And as you listen to multiple episodes on a topic you enjoy, your mind starts to associate these phrases with real situations, so that when similar situations occur in your own life, your brain automatically recalls the appropriate English expressions without conscious effort. And this is how thinking in English becomes natural, because your brain begins to anticipate what comes next, predict meaning from context, and respond in English instantly rather than translating from your native language. And one advanced technique to accelerate this process is to create mental English scenarios where you imagine yourself in different situations, such as shopping at a market, explaining your hobbies to a friend, giving directions, or describing your day at school. And while imagining these situations, you should silently or audibly describe everything in English, including objects, actions, feelings, and thoughts. And even if it feels repetitive, this practice reinforces your ability to think and respond in English under any circumstances. And by combining this with podcasts that demonstrate similar real-life dialogues, your brain begins to recognize patterns, sentence structures, and vocabulary, and starts applying them automatically in imagined scenarios. And as you repeat this exercise daily, the gap between listening, thinking, and speaking becomes smaller because your brain is constantly rehearsing English. And gradually, your mind stops relying on translation and starts functioning directly in English. And this mental rehearsal is essential for young learners because it allows you to internalize English without fear of mistakes, judgment, or pressure. And this is where podcasts shine, because you can pause, replay, slow down, or repeat sections of speech, giving you complete control over your learning pace. And as you practice, it is important to start noticing patterns, chunks, and expressions rather than individual words, because native speakers do not think word by word. They think in phrases. And when you train your brain to do the same, thinking in English becomes faster, more natural, and closer to fluency. And another effective strategy is to integrate thinking in English into your daily decisions, such as planning your day, making lists, setting goals, or even reflecting on your feelings. And by consistently doing this, your mind forms an English habit, which gradually extends to conversations, writing, problem solving, and even creative thinking. And this is why young learners who start early have a huge advantage, because the brain is more flexible and capable of adapting to new patterns at a younger age. And while it may seem challenging at first, every effort compounds over time, and the results become visible in weeks and months. Not just in listening and speaking, but also in reading, writing, and comprehension. Because thinking in English creates an internal ecosystem where all language skills grow together. And podcasts provide the perfect source for this growth, because they offer diverse topics, voices, accents, and levels, giving your brain exposure to different forms of English. And repeated exposure helps you adapt to variations naturally, without conscious effort. And as your mental fluency strengthens, you will notice that when watching movies, reading books, or chatting with friends in English, your understanding is immediate, your response is quick, and your mind rarely needs to pause and translate, because you have created an English-first thinking habit. And this habit is reinforced every time you consciously describe your surroundings, narrate your actions, or repeat dialogues from podcasts. And the key to mastery is consistency, because daily practice, even for a few minutes, builds long-lasting neural pathways that make English thinking automatic. And one technique to make it more engaging is to combine it with movement or daily tasks, such as describing your breakfast in English, explaining homework problems in your mind, or thinking through a story you read in English. Because combining language with action strengthens memory and makes thinking in English more natural. And podcasts act as both teacher and model in this process, providing you with clear examples of pronunciation, grammar, rhythm, and conversational patterns. And when young learners repeat or shadow these examples, they internalize not just words, but the way ideas are expressed in English, which is critical for thinking fluently. And over time, your mind will begin generating sentences, asking questions, and reasoning in English even when you're alone, which is exactly the sign that thinking in English has become automatic. And while it may feel strange initially, every repetition, every imagined conversation, and every active listening session contributes to rewiring your brain to operate in English naturally. And as your confidence grows, you can extend this practice to more complex situations, such as debating, problem solving, or reflecting on abstract concepts in English. And at this stage, thinking in English is no longer just a learning exercise. It becomes a cognitive habit that empowers communication, creativity, and critical thinking. And because podcasts provide endless material at every level, you are never limited by textbooks or classroom schedules. And the more diverse your listening, the broader your mental English library becomes. And when you combine all these techniques, shadowing, repetition, narration, visualization, daily integration, mental scenarios, active listening, and engagement with diverse podcasts, your brain gradually builds the capacity to think in English in every situation, whether simple, complex, familiar, or unfamiliar. And this mental fluency extends to speaking, writing, and comprehension naturally because your internal thought system is aligned with English and you no longer struggle to find words or construct sentences because your brain has already internalized the structures, expressions, and vocabulary needed to operate fluently. And young learners should remember that progress may feel slow at times, but every day of practice compounds, and soon your internal dialogue, decision-making, problem-solving, and self-expression will occur primarily in English, making the language a natural extension of your thought process. And by consistently using podcasts as both guide and model, you reinforce pronunciation, intonation, rhythm, and cultural context, which are crucial for fluent thought. And as you integrate these practices into your lifestyle, English thinking will become effortless, automatic, and enjoyable. And eventually, it will not feel like learning because your mind has shifted to operate in English intuitively. And this is the ultimate goal for young learners, because once your thoughts occur in English naturally, your ability to speak, understand, read, and write grows exponentially, opening doors to international communication, learning opportunities, creative expression, and personal growth. And every podcast episode you listen to, every phrase you repeat, every imagined scenario you narrate, and every mental exercise you perform adds another layer of neural connection, bringing you closer to the point where thinking in English in every situation is no longer a goal, but a natural, automatic habit. And at this stage, English becomes more than a subject or skill. It becomes a tool for thinking, reasoning, expressing ideas, and navigating the world. And technology, especially podcasts, provides the resources, consistency, and engagement needed to develop this skill fully. Because the brain thrives on repetition, exposure, and active engagement. And when young learners commit to daily practice, shadowing, self-talk, visualizing scenarios, imagining scenarios, and real-life application, they create lifelong mental fluency. And by continuing this process consistently, thinking in English will no longer feel like an effort, but a natural part of every thought, decision, and conversation, allowing you to communicate confidently, think critically, and grow personally and academically. And ultimately, this habit becomes the foundation for lifelong English mastery because your mind has been trained to operate in English automatically, effortlessly, and creatively in every situation imaginable. And podcasts, combined with imagination, active thought, and daily integration, are the most effective tools young learners can use to achieve this level of mental fluency, creating a lifelong skill that will support communication, education, creativity, and opportunity across all areas of life. And by consistently following this approach, the ability to think in English in every situation becomes not just possible, but inevitable, transforming your English learning experience into a continuous, immersive, and powerful journey that shapes your mind, your language, and your future. In conclusion, thinking in English in every situation is not just a skill, it is a habit, a mindset, and a lifelong tool that will transform the way you learn, communicate, and grow. By consistently listening to podcasts, practicing self-talk, narrating your daily life, visualizing scenarios, and actively engaging with the language, you train your brain to operate naturally in English. The more you practice, the faster your mind adapts, and over time, English becomes your default language for thought, expression, and creativity. Remember, it is not about perfection or avoiding mistakes. It is about persistence, consistency, and immersion. Every small effort compounds into fluency, confidence, and the freedom to use English in any situation. Start today, practice every day, and let your mind think, feel, and live in English. You will be amazed at how quickly your skills transform and how powerful this habit can become for your future.